Damon?
Yeah, I want to make, in response to these two questions in this conversation, I wanted to make 3 points. The first is about data. We've had a conversation about that has touched a couple of times on racial inequality in the United States, and we haven't put numbers on it because, and I think it's real important to put numbers on it because it's probably much worse than you think it is. And I'm talking to this audience, which probably thinks it's pretty bad, right? And we'll start with wealth. All right? The typical white family in the United States post-crash has something like $90,000 in net worth. Right? And what that reflects is two things. One is the near close to universal home ownership with some equity even after the crash, and a slice of the white population that has significant retirement assets. Not the majority, but a slice. $90,000. The typical African American and Latino households, and the numbers are different and they move around, but have roughly $5,000 in net worth. 5. As President Trump of the FLCI likes to say, it's less than the value of a good used car. And that's basically what it reflects, that the typical household of color owns a car. Now that is the reality of wealth disparity in the United States on racial terms. And it reflects income disparities. And it's getting worse, not better. More broadly, and I think this is really important in any conversation about wealth and ownership as solutions, and also any conversation about looking to capital markets as agents of positive reform. And I speak to this from many years of working it to try to achieve reform in the corporate economy through capital markets and through corporate governance. And these numbers are actually worse now than the ones I'm going to cite you, but they're the ones I know they're the ones I know. They're a little out of date. If you think about all the capital market assets in this country, to the extent that they're owned by Americans, 50% of Americans own nothing, meaning no capital market assets whatsoever. So if you want to ask, what is the typical American's investment in the stock market? Zippo. What goes on in the Dow Jones, at least it's a direct matter, has no more relevance to the typical American household, all right, than does the movement of the Tokyo Stock Exchange or the price of tea in China. Half of the capital market assets that are held by Americans are held by the next 45% of the income structure, and it's a very steep curve. So that first 20% or so now we're talking from 0 to 60% of the population structure, has trivial investments in the capital markets, a few $1,000s in a 401k. Their home is likely the only thing that matters to them in terms of wealth. The top 15% of the income structure has significant capital market assets, and they happen to be the people who watch CNN and subscribe to the New York Times, and there's this kind of circular conversation going on within this relatively small part of the population. And then 50%, half of all the capital market assets in the United States are held by the top 5%, and they call the shots. And within that group, there's a steep curve, so that really it's the top 1/10 of 1% that call the shots in the capital markets. Now, that's the genuine distribution of wealth in the United States, and it is getting worse, meaning the numbers I just described are out of date, and it's more unequal now. Now, why is it this way? I find discussions about ownership really frustrating because, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they don't hand out capital assets on the street. It's not something that's given away for free. All right? And it's never going to be. All right? The fundamental mistake that some people of good faith made during the last 20 years was the notion that through public policy, you could give away capital assets for free to people. The outcome of that dream was the complete destruction of home ownership in most African American communities in the United States, because cynical people exploited that and just wholesale looted poor communities. The way you get capital assets is that you have enough income to save. There is no other way to do it. Right? And that brings us back to what I was talking about in terms of broad-based wage growth. Everything else is a fantasy or a scam. Now, what does that mean? I mean, look, we could be polite here, but there is no reason to be polite here. Too many people have suffered through essentially attempts to sidestep this, and I'll tell you why. Because corporate donors won't fund it. All right? If you want corporate money, you've got to pretend that there's some other way to raise standards of living on a broad basis without raising wages. Now, to answer the question that was posed to you about is there a conflict between what Barry and I was saying, Barry and I spent a lot of time, not recently, but a lot of time talking about this. I'm convinced that there actually isn't. That the political economy realities. You know, you can make an abstract model where you say, well, you got to have concentration in order to be able to have bargaining and all this kind of stuff. But the political realities through history are that if business gets sufficiently concentrated, it has the political power to crush labor. Right? So that if you look at the periods and the countries where there is some balance of power between business and labor and some ability to raise wages, you've got a healthy small business sector. Right? And this was true, and Barry educated me on this. This was true in America in the 1950s and 1960s. Now finally, policy, because this was Bob's challenge. We've got a real problem here in terms of how do we get the capital investment necessary to deal with increasingly threatening externalities. And how do we get the capital investment to ensure, and I know I'm having a US-specific conversation, but it's true for every other society in the world, how do we get the capital investment necessary in public goods to maintain competitive societies? Because we're all kind of sunk if we let, for example, our public infrastructure rot away. The United States has been the world leader in the notion that somehow private capital markets are going to fund public goods. Right? The term public-private partnership is a code word for that idea. It's a code word for that idea. That idea is just dead wrong. It's dead wrong as a matter of economic theory, and it's dead wrong as a matter of historical practice and experience. And we're living through it now. And I'll give you an example of what that means. In 2008, in the United States, President Obama, when he ran for president, said, we need to have a high-speed rail network in the United States. At the same time, somebody in China said the same thing. Somebody in China said, you know, and I don't know who it was, but maybe Barry does. Somebody in China said, we need to have a high-speed rail network. If we do, we can reduce carbon emissions, we can move people more rapidly, economic development, a lot of good things will flow. President Obama said the same thing. President Obama got in office, and he devoted a few $billion in his stimulus package to trying to seed high-speed rail networks that would then be fully developed with public-private partnerships. That's the reality of what President Obama had proposed, and it was fought bitterly. And you know what, today? We don't have a single mile of high-speed rail in the United States by international standards. The Acela doesn't count. It doesn't. It's 50 miles per hour slower than what people considered high-speed rail around the rest of the world. In 2008, China had no high-speed rail networks either, not a single mile. This month, but China didn't do public-private partnerships. In a dictatorship, as people have pointed out in the past, you can just kind of order things. Right? In China, this month, their high-speed rail network will surpass, in passenger miles, the United States domestic airline system. Right? Now, that is what falling behind looks like. Right? And if we're going to have public policies that address this set of issues, and both at this level of kind of national competitiveness, and at the level of what are we going to do about the fact that we have consigned 30% of our country to poverty, right? Then we have to have some recognition that capital investment's not going to flow just by the invisible hand either to public goods or to radically disempowered communities. We've got to have institutions that make the change.
Damon, thank you.